Hi, everyone. My name is Lise Ragbir. I'm also a co-founder of VERGE and managing partner. I was born and raised in Montreal. Both my parents are from Trinidad, but I actually split my time right now between Montreal and Austin, Texas, where I currently am. I've been in arts and cultural administration work for over more than 2 decades now, which is aging me, but it's the truth. And I've worked with private foundations, I've worked as a grant maker, I've worked with museums, I've worked with community-based art centers, all really in a similar capacity as we tried to build access to a range of arts and cultural offerings. But I want to talk a little bit about how VERGE came to be and how that really stemmed from a long trajectory in the arts and cultural world. And it really stemmed from sort of this recognition a couple of years ago, seeing specifically Black and Brown women being invited into predominantly white spaces with a seat at a table like never before, but also quietly recognizing that a lot of these people were leaving shortly after exciting appointments were made. So a closer look at that revealed that, this wasn't a failure on the part of the people who had moved into these positions, nor was it a failure on the part of the organizations. We're not here to villainize anybody, but it was really sort of a lack of resourcing that many of these organizations didn't have, as they were inviting people to the table who had historically not been there. So working with Julia and Ola, thinking about why this might be, we kind of came together to look at this in a comprehensive way, looking at this through an eye of diversity, equity, inclusion, looking at this through an eye of human resources, so that we can do our best to do what we can to equip organizations with the resources that they need to help the people that they want to move into their spaces thrive. What does that look like exactly? It means we work as recruiters. We are a talent agency that identifies exceptionally talented people and works with them to place them in organizations that want to work with them. But we also provide support, HR support, strategic cultural strategy support to help build the organizations, help build organizational infrastructures that can help these people thrive within these organizations. That sort of covers it in broad strokes. Ola, Julia, anything I'm missing that you want to share?
No,
okay.
that sounds good.
Right. Well, Julia, maybe we can look at some of the data.
Yeah, that sounds great. All right. So how did this survey and subsequent panel discussion, where we are today, come to be? So as VERGE, throughout 2023, we've had a plethora of conversations with job seekers, talented members of the global majority. And from the conversations, we noticed a few refrains, similarities in experiences, as well as desires for how things could be different. For example, we kept hearing of a real desire for growth and learning at work, which professionals from the global majority were not often finding. Or people that we spoke to would describe being a lonely only at work, meaning the only person of color on their team. And for a number of reasons, how that made them not want to stick around. And that led us to a conversation about the employee life cycle, or the employee journey. And in HR, this is a standard way of conceiving of an employee's relationship with an employer. Ideally, it should be cyclical and mutually beneficial. In the best possible scenario, it can end and then pick back up again. And what we've found is that employers in the art industry, for a myriad of reasons, are staying stuck in just one part of the journey and are neglecting the middle stages. And all of this led us to consider the relationship between hiring and retention, and to develop the survey, Futuring the Workplace, and our panel discussion today. So what do we mean when we say futuring? And I've been teased by members of my family that this is a made-up word. And yes, it's a made-up word, but it's also, we used it to spark interest, and also because there wasn't really a word that quite makes sense for what we were talking about. So when we were thinking about this, we have been talking a lot about how, and part of the reason why VERGE exists is that census data anticipates that by 2045, people of color, which broadly, according to census definitions right now means Hispanic, Black, Asian, multiracial, or other, will make up the majority of the US population. And that tells us that the future of the workforce will look differently than it does now. Predominantly white organizations in our industry should diversify for all of the reasons, but by necessity need to prepare to. So for us, futuring means preparing for the future, transforming business strategies, systems, and workplace cultures. And we wanted to bring our internal discussions out into a broader field. Part of why we exist is because we're all three of us very passionate about creating and sustaining communities in our industry. So we developed a mini survey or a pulse check as a way to prompt conversations within our communities. So it was structured with questions relating to hiring and retention, and we kept the survey open for 2 weeks. Some caveats about the survey process itself. Again, this was just a way for us to start a conversation. It was a relatively small sample size, and the participation was limited to VERGE's audience and community. But it did allow us to learn a lot of things and have even more conversations. So it was great. A little bit about who took the survey. Over half of the participants are currently employed in an arts organization, and almost half are currently seeking work in the arts. And that includes over half of respondents from the global majority. And what this affirms is that the talent is out there and is actively seeking work in our industry. We already knew that, but it's good to, have things validated that you firmly believe. So the only demographic data that we saw was, do you identify as a member of the global majority or not? And almost 2/3 of the survey participants selected yes. And we use this term global majority as a broad way to encompass people of color and anyone else whose racial and ethnic background is complex and who does not typically benefit from systemic privileges of whiteness. So interestingly, over 1/3 of participants from the global majority indicated that they are currently employed in the arts and seeking work. And this reconfirms for us that there are employment factors that are preventing the retention of people of the global majority in the arts industry. Also of note, 1/5 of the participants from the global majority are not currently employed in the arts, but wish to be. And this is supported by the conversations we've been having with talent. There is a specific population of job seekers from the global majority who want to break into the arts industry from other fields, and that is something that VERGE is here to support. So we wanted to determine what is drawing people in to apply for a job. What we found, interestingly, was that the position's title matters to all candidates, but particularly members of the global majority, in fact, 70% more. The takeaway here as an employer is be sure your job title is internally accurate and also consider how it aligns in responsibilities and pay with similar job titles at peer organizations. We also learned that an institution's name will catch the eye of all candidates, but particularly members of the global majority. And while that may seem self-evident, what it means to us is your organization's branding matters, and you may first attract candidates with your name recognition. So if you're an employer, are you aware of what your name means to potential new employees? Is it positive, neutral, or negative? So once a job posting has caught someone's eye, then what? What is going to make them apply? We found that people of the global majority are going to hop on those search engines and do a deep dive of research, significantly more than job seekers who are not people of color. What that tells us is that as employers, your public-facing messaging is a key element in attracting and retaining candidates from the global majority. And also that whatever information is out there, whether it's good or bad, you need to be prepared to address it, whether it's in marketing materials and branding that's you're putting out there and controlling the messaging yourself, or addressing it in the interview process where you can maybe give a more honest answer. We also found that all candidates are going to reach out to their networks and tailor their applications to the job and the organization. So what that means is a candidate's network is key, and an organization's reputation within the field is a factor in a candidate submitting an application. And that also means for employers that your current employees are messaging your brand or not, and your work culture will be made evident through these professional connections. Again, probably self-evident information, but it was great to see it kind of emphasized here. And candidates working on tailoring their applications, to me, that also just says respect the candidates who are applying for jobs with your organization, respect their time, respond to them, be timely, and communicate with them throughout the process because they've put time in to apply to jobs with you. So once someone has applied and gone through the interview process and accepted a job offer, what are they looking forward to on their first day? We learned that the top response for people of the global majority was learning the why, meaning what are the business goals and how does my role support those goals? This emphasizes that an organization has to be able to effectively communicate how its business goals inform individual work and translate that through an onboarding plan. And the top response for people not from the global majority was jumping into the work, which we will unpack more later in our conversation. And interestingly, the response, a job is a job, I reserve my excitement for things outside of work, was only selected by people from the global majority. And while we work in an industry that often asks for full throttle commitment, and that expression, anything for an artist, is used often, it's worth remembering that that kind of mentality can lead to burnout. And some employees may have boundaries and place more value on their personal lives, and that also has to be okay. So backing up a little bit, studies show that on average, the first 44 days are an essential decision-making period for an employee to want to stay at an organization. You know, lots of employers have 90-day review periods, but you may keep or lose an employee even in those first 2 months. So effective training and a comprehensive onboarding plan are essential to retain new employees. It's also important to remind your line managers that training and onboarding should be personalized. Everyone learns information in different ways. And we've learned that prior to starting a new job, people from the global majority are twice as likely to be worried about not being given the resources to succeed in a new role. So how can you reduce those concerns? This can start in the interview process. Communicating how new employees are supported, trained, onboarded, introduced to others, etc., should be part of how you present your organization to a candidate. We also learned that people from the global majority are more than twice as likely to be concerned about connecting with others who share their values. And again, communicating business and individual values is an essential part of an employer's messaging in the interview process. Also, finding ways to connect like-valued employees, such as socially outside of work, through employee resource groups, or within teams or projects, is another way that managers can plan to support their direct reports. Lastly, we also learned that people from the global majority are more than twice as likely to be concerned about not fitting into a workplace culture. And employers need to first understand what their organization's culture is through surveys or one-on-one conversations, such as those that we offer through VERGE, and then clearly communicating what the workplace culture is. And then working to take steps to onboard and welcome new employees. Again, all of that remains an essential part of the preliminary process of welcoming employee into that employee life cycle. All right. And then, so once someone starts a new job, what are they happy to notice in their new workplace? So this was a ranked question with 10 options, and the highest ranked selections made by people not from the global majority were somewhat more weighted toward themselves, such as colleagues checking in on me and asking about my preferences and opportunities to strengthen my skill sets. But the top 3 choices selected by people from the global majority all relate to the group: diversity and inclusion, and a high awareness of racial identity in a new workplace. And what this tells us is that people from the global majority are keenly aware of being the lonely only or of the relative racial diversity at their workplace. Diversity generally, meaning age, parental status, disability, it's also an important factor in all new hires feeling pleased to be at their new job. And as expected, a workplace culture that can demonstrate inclusion goes a long way toward retaining all new employees. So I know that was a lot of information. Thanks for dancing through that with me, but I'll hand the mic over to Ola now to introduce our panelists, and we can discuss more of this data in a kind of real world ways with everybody here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julia. I am chomping at the bit. There's so much meat. And because I know our panelists and the unique perspectives they bring to this, I'm really excited to introduce them to our attendees today. We've got 3 wonderful guests. I'll start with Eunice. Eunice Bélidor is a Montreal-based curator, critic, and researcher specializing in contemporary Haitian art. And she's interested in fashion design, performance, Black post-Black studies and feminism. She is the creator of curatorial tips and Instagram research tool for curators. Next, we have Jumoke McDuffie-Thurmond. Born and raised in Lenapehoking, the ancestral Lenape land, which you may know as Brooklyn, New York. Jumoke is a cultural worker whose practice considers art, advocacy, and the enlivening potential for justice that emerges from their intersections. And third, and we've got Aundrae Parchment. Aundrae is an HR professional whose work lies at the intersection of learning and development, recruitment, employee engagement, and HR, bridging the gaps between strategic objectives and the core values of individuals and organizations. Aundrae has developed policies, surveys, and assessment tools across industries, including retail, hospitality, the nonprofit sector, e-commerce, and startups. He holds a BA in psychology, a BA in religious studies, an MS in industrial organizational psychology, and a PhD in organizational leadership and ethics. We are thrilled to have the three of you join us today. I am excited to jump in, and I want to throw a question really to the panel at large. It's a two-parter, but just as this information is fresh in our minds, as Julia brought us through the findings, I'm wondering, is there anything that stood out to you as, you know, surprising or affirming or interesting or not surprising? And to sort of tie it in with our event focus, what does it suggest about the future of the arts workforce? And this is for any one of the three of you. What stood out to you? What does it say to you, if anything?
If I may start,
oh, please do.
The thing that struck me was the stat about the excitement and importance of having colleagues from the global majority. I mean, by experience, I knew that entering the workplace, you know, when the doors are open and then you see your colleagues and you realize more and more that you will be the only one, is like, you have that sinking feeling that you're like, oh, you know, I'm the token, but I you know, you never know that it's something that a lot of us feel. So I was happy to know that it was not something that was exclusive to me, but I was also surprised to know that it was a concern for a lot of people. And it was interesting also to see the differences with the people that were not from the global majority, saying that they were looking forward to helping and to contribute their ideas, whereas, you know, when you enter the workplace, usually that's also what you want to do, but it's never the first thing that comes to you when you enter the workplace. So that was something that really struck me, and to see, you know, the differences between the respondent and things like that. So yeah, that's something that I for sure wanted to mention.
Yeah, it's always interesting to see kind of lived experience get married with this kind of broader data. You're like, I'm not the only one who's going through this. But the distinctions as well are really important. And I want to follow that up with a question for Aundrae. Given that you are an HR professional with that depth of expertise across all those areas we just named, what are your thoughts on the employee life cycle and where employers tend to get stuck? This was an especially interesting slide for me. Curious on your take.
Yeah, I think that this is a fantastic question, and my brain runs wild when I think of like the employee life cycle, so bear with me. Recruiting is the easy part, and for as cumbersome as recruiting is as an activity, it is the easy part. Once you have the talent in front of you is the big mystery. And I think that thinking about the data, most people immediately just want to revolutionize everything, but a lot of the global majority is just asking for basic things about how to do their job. I'll throw out some statistics, and I promise I'll be quick about it. From 2020 to 2021, we saw turnover across the United States go from 57 to 47%. This is where we clap and cheer. Yes, turnover is going down. Within the arts and entertainment industry, it went from 129% down to 76. And those are some alarming numbers. So let's pause for shock value, and then kind of like about it's still within the top 3 spaces or industries within the United States where there's significant turnover. Before the pandemic, 3.3 million people a month across the United States were leaving their job. It's a huge number. It went down at the top of the pandemic to 1.9, but right back up to 3.3. So you ask the question of what's actually happening. Organizations are focusing on how we hire people, we get them in the door, and then we move on. We're ready to do the work immediately versus pausing and making sure that we have the support parameters that are necessary for the employee life cycle. The additional thought is that there needs to be a level of transparency. So if we're looking at the image on the right, if we're transparent and honest and authentic as an organization in that space, people will want to stay for their onboarding. They'll stay engaged, they'll perform, they'll develop, and they'll build meaningful relationships. A lot of conversations that have been had recently have been centered around, are we looking for a culture add or are we looking for a culture fit? And oftentimes, I think the piece that we forget is we're looking for both. But we need to be honest about what culture we're identifying and what culture we're trying to hold on to. Is it a conceptual culture where everyone loves each other in their family, meanwhile families don't always get along? Or is it a culture that embraces people in their growth, their development, and their individual goals are very much so linked to organizational goals, and it's that perfect marrying and journey for the individual that makes them want to stay. So 99% of the time we're focusing on recruiting, someone's here, let's move on. But then they kind of like lead to that statistic where they're on an island. They don't see other people that look like them, and they don't feel like they have the necessary support and tools to do their jobs. Within that first 90 days, it's crucial to determining if someone's going to stick with an organization or if they're going to walk out. And they might not walk out after 90 days. They might stick around for a year. I'll do it sometimes, stick around for a year, but you knew within your first 2 weeks, this organization isn't going to support me. So if we're going to be intentional about our culture, how do we invest the time into our people before they give us their resignation?
Wow. There's so much there, Aundrae. And I love the idea of culture add or culture fit. Was that yeah, that we have to ask.
I can't take credit for that though.
I know, but it's a great sort of lens, right? Because we say what we want, right, in our values as an organization, as an employer, but what are we willing to do behind that? That resonates. I want to ask you something, Jumoke, and I want to start on one of the findings that seemed kind of, sort of self-evident, but as we started to peel back the layers, some things came to the surface that we want to pick your brain on. So our findings tell us that job seekers are paying the most attention to the title when they're deciding whether they want to even consider pursuing a position. So arts roles can get pretty specific. These titles, registrar, preparator, curator of XYZ. And the other thing we find in our work is that the responsibilities attached to a given title are often varying significantly from one employer to the next. The same title means something different elsewhere. To us, that suggests that something as basic as a job title is a potential barrier to entry. Your thoughts, Jumoke? Do you think titles are a barrier to entry? If so, how can job seekers navigate them, and how might organizations minimize the confusion?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's a really good question. And I think that honestly, that discrepancy that you're identifying is part of, I think, what is an issue on an institutional scale, right? I think the biggest barrier to entry is the fact that many of these institutions are nebulous by nature, right? On the outside looking in, you don't quite get a sense of how this specific organization operates or what this role does within this organization, right? And even within an organization, within the departments, right? Does a director do the same things in these different spaces? And so I think that beyond the job title, I think that the kind of nebulous nature of arts organizations themselves can be that biggest barrier to entry, right? And I think that that's something that's really hard to attend to on the individual level, on one hand, but also underscores and emphasizes the need for spaces like this, right? Because I think the more context we have for dialogue, where we can talk about and compare our individual experiences, think about what that means for some of our collective experiences, the way our individual experiences can provide insight or possibility that we might have not known if we didn't hear that story from someone else, I think that's really important. So one way I think job seekers and folks who are currently employed in these positions can, on an interpersonal level, begin to erode some of that fogginess, is by being very generous with our information, with our stories, and with our questions, right? When we're thinking about what is the work that's required to actually create a communal environment, that generosity, both in a willingness to ask, but also willingness to be a resource, is really important. I think on an institutional level, the data suggests that institutions need to do more, or I would say create more pathways to access an understanding around what's happening in the space, and just the job posting, right? Like, is there specific programming that you as an institution can develop that gives people an enhanced literacy around what being at this organization means, all right? Or what the distinction is between being in a gallery versus a museum, right? I think that it kind of goes beyond just that listing and really being proactive in creating space for people to gain a broader understanding.
Right. So, I mean, that's super key. I mean, I think one of the things that we hear sometimes is that folks don't want to seem like they're not informed or not experienced. So that, you know, is of critical importance, right? Because, you know, you said it, it's a murky sort of, you know, world as it relates to what these roles, what the kind of scaffolding around them, you know, consists of. So that's super helpful. Now, Eunice, I want to go back to you on something else that we kind of observed and got interested by, and that was the finding that 65% of our respondents from the global majority said that once they are interested, once they determine that they want to pursue a position, they go deep in digging up everything they can find. I have been very guilty of this. I've gone very deep, right? You know, when it comes to the institution or the organization, and you know, there's some reading between the lines on that, you know, why it's so important for the global majority. But I for the benefit of our, you know, employers, that speaks to sort of public-facing messaging as being super important. But there's also a piece of it that isn't like what's publicly sort of put out there by the company, right? How do we go about finding that information that we're so desperately seeking? And if you have any advice on, you know, questions to ask in interviews, right, for job seekers to help fill in the gaps, as well as, well, let's start there. How do we deal with the fact that we are so hungry for information? We know that there's you know, sort of, you know, communication coming from the employer, the institution, but we want more.
Yeah, I like this question because I think that oftentimes we believe that an interview is us being asked questions, whereas we can also interview the employer, because at the end of the day, you spend so many hours, you know, in the workplace, and, you know, this is going to be your livelihood. So you want to make sure that you're in a place that you're comfortable and that, you know, it's not a burden to go to work every day. So I think it's really important to, first of all, have the, you know, give yourself the permission and the confidence to ask some questions in the interview. You know, there's always this classic, you know, at the end of the interview where they ask you, do you have any questions for us? You have a set of questions that are prepared for that. But, you know, during the interview, when you get some questions, you can also, you know, reply back with like, you know, you're asking me this question. What about in your case, what's happening and things like that? But I think that questions that are really important to ask is, depending on the position that you're applying to, it's important to know if the position has existed before, or if the position has been created recently, why it has been created, what are they looking to do with that specific position, and if it is a position that is you know, historical to the workplace, it is important to ask about what has been done in this you know, in this specific role. If the tasks that have been done are things that they're looking to continue, or if they're looking to change those tasks and to, like, you know, re-envision the position. And if this is something that they're looking to do, you should definitely ask why you are considered to be doing that position. What in the sets of skills that you are presenting makes them believe that you are the ideal candidate to answer, to fill this position. I think it is also very important to ask about a clear, organizational chart about where your role lands in the actual structure, either with the person that is interviewing you or with the people that you will be working with if you do have that role. Very important to understand the roles and responsibility attached to your position, but also to the position that will be working with you and around you. And yeah, you should definitely ask about the relationships between you and the person that is currently hiring you. What is expected of the relationship, what is expected of your position in the workplace. Really important to ask questions that really position you in the workplace and see how, see how they imagine that, or,
Right.
So those are the questions that I think are good to ask during interviews.
Those are wonderful. Those are gems. And it strikes me that if they're struggling, right, to answer some of these questions, that might be a little bit of a learning moment for the candidate as well. That's incredibly helpful. Now, Lise, I wanna point the next question to you, because I know you are constantly in conversation with talent and taking in sort of the broader trends in terms of what talent is looking for or asking for. Do the conversations that you have line up with the data? And I'm curious, are there some of the key things? What are some of the key things you're hearing from job seekers that either sort of validate or reinforce what we have learned? Any similarities? And I think you're on mute.
Thank you. Yeah, the data absolutely aligns, which is great to see. It's great to see the information sort of come back to you in a different format. One of the things that I'll share, one of the distinctions between the conversations and we're having in the data specifically, is through conversation, we keep hearing about being the lonely only. We keep hearing about the need to have or need opportunities to grow within the organization. And also just as how Eunice described, sort of expecting or wanting organizational structure to lead the path, to kind of help explain how to move about within an organization. So those are the sort of three things that we keep hearing talent ask for. But what the data showed was this sort of more touchy-feely aspect, which is weird for data and surveys to show that. But the data really sort of highlighted the need to feel cared for and the need to have this alignment of personal values, which has always been sort of a subtext within these conversations. But to see it sort of teased out in the data this way was really helpful. It's sometimes hard to bring some of this more touchy-feely work to the workplace, where these sort of personal considerations into a professional environment could feel uncomfortable. But we're also seeing that it's necessary. It might bring some discomfort, but we have to sort of push through that discomfort to be able to give it the attention that it needs. The other thing, Julia talked a little bit about this earlier, or actually a lot about it, but we are talking with a lot of people from the global majority who are not currently working in the arts, but who would like to break in. And they're sort of standing on the sidelines, wondering, watching, looking with questions. Is this a space for me? Can I do this job? What is this job? So we're also recognizing that there's a real need for, to use the word that Jumoke used, a real need for literacy, and a real need for forums in which some of the sort of mystery can be explored to further opportunities for people who really, really do want to thrive and are exceptionally talented.
Lise, I love the idea, and that literacy in sort of the business and administration of art, or the way that it sort of varies, is different than your competency, right? So you can have a great candidate who's held back by, you know, whether it's jargon, or whether it's, you know, these internal things that tend to vary. That's super helpful. You know, as we were talking among the three of us, Julia, Lise, and I, one of the things that we found most striking, and Julia teased this earlier, was the question, in response to the question about, you know, what folks are looking forward to doing as they anticipate that first day of work. One of the biggest disparities was the idea that folks from the global majority were really kind of poised in this onboarding mindset of wanting to learn the position, learn the why, learning the how it fits, as Eunice spoke to, that kind of, you know, how do the pieces come together? How does my role support other roles? What does success look like? You know, what are the tools I need to master that are specific to this workplace? And folks not from the global majority were much more likely to say jumping in to solve problems was the thing that they were looking forward to. And that's pretty major. That's pretty significant, and I believe under discussed. So Aundrae, I want to point this in your direction. With information like this, how might an organization or an institution go about reimagining an inclusive onboarding process?
Yeah, this is fun, and my brain runs wild for everything. So it definitely runs for something like this. I think my initial reaction is we as people try to create this transformative experience without getting back to the basics. And that's kind of like at the core of everything that I think about. What is the basic key elements that someone needs to essentially thrive and survive? And I'll throw this analogy out there. Someone's coming to do some contracting work at your house. You direct them through the house and you explain to them, this is here. This is here. I've tried to do these things and I have failed. Now I'm looking for you to come in and intervene and support in these very specific ways. And I also reflect on, if someone comes in to fix something, if they immediately just start tapping at things, will they more than likely break things that you didn't intend for them to address in any way, shape, or form?
Right.
Absolutely. So the key to successfully having someone stay at an organization is to give them the tools for success within their onboarding. I'm going to throw out some more statistics because numbers make me cringe and make me excited at the same time. So I will share them for cringe and
Us too.
Audience as well. According to a Gallup survey, 51% of Americans experience stress throughout the workday. That number doesn't significantly decrease for new hires. For someone within their first 90 days of work, what are you stressed about? How has your organization created a stressful place versus mapping out everything that you need for your employee journey within your first 90 days? Paychecks noted that there were a couple of elements to improving the onboarding process, getting your team involved, celebrating and welcoming people, authenticity around what they're stepping into, and then making sure that they feel supported. So making sure that the leader is doing consistent check-ins, making sure that there's a level of clarity for every single one of the check-ins, whether they're 30, 60, 90-day structures, and road mapping everything that the employee should be learning within someone's first 90 days. We're naturally inclined to do. I've done this at my last organization, but we should spend a little bit of time marinating and recognizing that the more time we spend marinating in the experience, the more time we'll be able to effectively do our jobs. Leaders from reverse lens should be spending time investing the seasonings into our employees, making the connections for employees for them versus them making them themselves, and they'll have a much better time. If you summarize all of that, onboarding should be three very large buckets: clarification, culture, and connection. And as you create a roadmap that includes all three of those things, people will absolutely stick around and they'll enjoy their experience. And then I'll throw one more analogy out there. Essentially, buy yourself a brand new pair of Christian Louboutins, or if you're from New York, you get yourself a pair of fresh Air Force Ones. The same effort that you make to ensure that they're not creased the first day is the same intentional effort that you should make to uphold the same integrity of the shoe 3 years from now, 4 years from now, 5 years from now. So from my perspective, the onboarding experience doesn't ever end. You're always getting onboarded to a new project. You're getting onboarded to a new way of working. And what I will also transparently say, I don't think that that's a function that sits with HR. That's a function that within the organization, and people don't leave because they don't like HR. I introduce myself as an HR friend whenever I meet people, because that's what I'm here to do. I'm here to support you. Granted, we're all here to work, but at the end of the day, your leader is the person that's going to be able to guide you. They know where the potholes and the barriers are to your success, and they're the ones that are going to be able to help you navigate throughout this space. So that intentional clarity and connections that they're building for you will help you have the longest tenure that you would want to have within an organization.
Wow, I want that to be. I want that to be shouted from the rooftops. I know, Julia, you are a believer, a strong believer in a lot of those. And I mean, just as an aside, I've worked with a lot of organizations in the arts who view some of those sort of fundamentals that you talked about as sort of dressing, like if we have time, or and I think you're calling for a very significant shift for some. Thankfully, some employers are there and understand the value of that onboarding process, but lots of food for thought. Now, I wanted to point to one or two other pieces of info or data. There was a finding about what people were worried about. So in this order, the top three were not being given the resources to accomplish what I came here to do, not finding people who share my values, and not fitting into the workplace culture. One more, we'll give you a number for the fourth one, meeting the demands of the job. Okay, so Eunice, how does this compare to your experience throughout your career? Has your experience aligned with some of those worries? Have they been different?
Yeah, well, surprisingly, that I had some jobs where a lot of these were worries and they never materialized. And then I had some jobs where I was not worried about that at all. And then, it ended up being the reason why I left the organization. But one thing that was really important for me to mention, especially for people from the global majority, is number 4, meeting the demands of the job. Oftentimes, I feel like this worry comes from the imposter syndrome that comes from, our education, where we have been educated, the way we have been educated, also the idea that we have to work twice as hard and all of that. I think that this is a very serious concern because it's something that just is, intrinsically in, the mindset when you arrive in the workplace. But surprisingly, I've had work experience. I've only had one work experience where I was not given the resources to accomplish what I came to do, which for me was, very surprising, because I've had a position at a university, and I had this idea that I will be working in academia, so it will be a hurdle for me to get my ideas across, because academia is very hard for Black women, and it ended up being so seamless that I was like, okay, I'm happy that it was a worry, but it ended up not at all affecting the my work experience. But I think that in my experience, it is not being given the resources to accomplish what you came to do is the main reason why people would leave the workplace. Because when we looked at the statistics earlier, there was one line that I really agreed with, was a job is a job. And a lot of people were answering that. So in the end, if this is your mindset when you enter the workplace, then not fitting into the workplace culture, I mean, you can come in and do your work, and then, at the end of the day, you can go back to your own world. And then, this is something that is easier to, to work around.
Yeah.
But when you're not given the resource to accomplish your work, then you're in the workplace, you don't know what to do, you don't know how to do
Right.
things. And it
Yeah.
also decreases your sense of value in the workplace. It decreases your confidence in the work that you're doing, in your professional experience as well. So yeah, I think
Yeah.
this is really something that should something that employers should be really mindful of when working with anyone, really.
Yeah, that's so important. It's this idea of a moving target, like, as especially for folks who already come in with this sort of idea of I have to work doubly as hard, if the goal isn't actually reachable because you don't have the support and the resources, we internalize it quite a bit, and that's the kind of thing that, yeah, I've been in situations for sure where I've had an experience that is very painful for those reasons. Thanks for sharing that, Eunice. I think we have time for one more of the prepared questions, but and this one's going to be for you, Jumoke. So we talked to, we asked our respondents in imagining themselves in a new workplace. What would you be most pleased to notice? And number one, people from the global majority. Number two, a diverse group of colleagues across gender, age, ethnicity, abilities, family status. Number three, colleagues checking in on me and asking for my opinion and preferences. Number four, an inclusive workspace that celebrates difference. So there's a rank, in that order. Now, you lead a culture and equity program at a major international gallery. We can imagine that number one is the top priority, or maybe it isn't. What's your perspective on how these priorities of job seekers, sort of line up with what you are seeing and emphasizing?
Yeah, well, I'm willing to admit that this is maybe a personal hang-up, but
That's okay.
I'm very skeptical of initiatives that start with the diversity piece, right? I think oftentimes that can lead to a kind of cosmetic diversity where you can think about diversifying who is in the room, right? But not actually being attentive to the dynamics that are at play in the room. And so when I'm thinking about the spaces that I facilitated, the spaces I create with my colleagues, my first point of emphasis is thinking about what are the dynamics in this room? And is this a space where people from the global majority can participate in the knowledge production that is happening in this space, right? In the decision-making that is happening in this space. Entering an environment where you don't have to build a structure for you to be in that environment and also do your work at the same time. And I think this gets at some of those other priorities that you mentioned, right? Like, again, colleagues checking in on you and asking about your opinion, right? That's not just a nice and good thing to do, right? Really involving people in the structural process of how things are happening is crucial to creating the sense of equity, right? And I think when I hear the phrase celebrating difference, I think that celebratory piece is something that we often say, but really needs to be put into practice, right?
Yeah.
Something that is a constant delight about my role in the work that I'm able to do is that I'm constantly surrounded by people who know so many things that I don't, right? Who have so many lived experiences that I don't have. How do I, as a facilitator, create an environment where I'm not just listening and receiving that, but really relishing the information that comes with that and incorporating that into the way we design programs, right? Into the ways we have decision-making processes and things of that nature. So I think that when you do those things, it creates a context where people from the global majority who are in the space are positioned to thrive and also participate in the building of the space, right? And so I
That's
think
fantastic. Yeah, it's funny, Jumoke, I've had the pleasure of sort of connecting with you in work contexts before, and you really do celebrate your people, and it feels different because we are not used to it. I think this idea of sort of really owning, the connection with people and culture in authentic ways is something that I wish we saw more of. Wish I could replicate that kind of energy, but I appreciate that you guys are out there and sowing the seeds for this important sort of paradigm shift. I want to remind people who are attending that if you do have questions, feel free to add them to the question and answer function. But Lise, while we are giving folks a moment to sort of, because we already have some questions coming in, but we want to give some folks a bit of time to ask others. We have been talking, as you know, about the ways that burnout impacts retention. And, I don't know anyone in this space that hasn't dealt with burnout. It's a real thing. They're actual sort of physical impacts that I won't get into. But this issue of burnout it was reinforced by a recent study we were discussing from Museums Moving Forward, which you should all read, of course. We love data from all the places, but it spoke to the damaging effects of burnout. And I wonder for you, can you talk a little bit about some of the ways to mitigate burnout? Unmute.
Okay, I want to say I'm mindful of our time, and I really love to get to the questions from some of the people who've joined us today. So I won't speak quickly, but I'll keep my comments brief. This burnout has actually, in fact, come up in this conversation multiple times today in ways that we might not recognize. And it is very specifically about a misalignment or a lack of clarity about how an individual ties into the organization's overall mission. That misalignment, that way that an individual employee doesn't understand their overall role and how everyone moves forward together, is one of the major causes to burnout. It causes people to spin their wheels. It has people being pulled in multiple directions. It has people doing unnecessary work, all of which can be drain time, drain energy, drain creative thought. So one of the ways, quite simply, or maybe not simply, to mitigate burnout is by being very clear in the beginning and every day forward about the ways in which an individual's skills fold into the overall or the organization's overall goals. That's a really key piece. That's something that the organization can bring to the individual. On the other side, it's up to the individual, to the employee, to be able to ask questions, find a way to have an open dialogue with your manager, find a way to also set boundaries and protect yourself within the workplace, not protect yourself, but find boundaries so that you can work within the constraints of the organization's work culture. I also want to say that people of color and women are more susceptible to burnout. That is for a range of ways, a range of reasons. One being it's sometimes harder for those people to speak up, to say no, to say don't do that. And microaggressions are a thing that can constantly chip away at the psychological safety that people need in a place to be able to show up energized, to show up not drained, and to show up in ways that they can contribute. So I'll stop there. And if anyone else has any, I feel like we can all talk about burnout, and so professionally and personally. I don't know if anyone else on the panel has any thoughts on burnout. Silence speaks volumes.
I'll give a quick thought, and only because it came from a lot of self-reflection. I think that there's a level of mindfulness as it intersects with burnout. We allow ourselves to get burnt out. And it's because we don't create boundaries. And I feel like I heard that earlier. Like once we recognize what our goals are as they relate to the organization, you create boundaries and you identify what it is that you're willing to accept. And once you share that with other people, I think that we protect ourselves to a certain degree from a level of burnout. And I personally have been really bad at doing that, and I have found myself to be burnt out. And upon reflecting on it, I've allowed myself to get to this point versus recognizing it early on and still progressing in that same direction. So I would say the mindfulness around our workloads and what we allow in the workspace definitely impacts your proximity to burnout.
Right. I know we wanted to leave a little space for questions. Julia, you've been monitoring. Anything come up that we want to punt to our panelists?
Yeah. We have a great one from Mario. I'll read it out loud, and I think if I click answer live, everybody will be able to see it. So the question / statement is: the arts sector encompasses nonprofit as well as for-profit institutions. It would appear that most arts institutions are nonprofits. However, there are many significant differences between these types of spaces, particularly when comparing workplace cultures, salaries, competitive environments, etc. Has your data shown significant differences between for-profit and nonprofit workplaces in terms of featuring these spaces?
I'm curious to hear from our panelists, but it's timely because VERGE just participated in a panel for ArtsCom where we were navigating some of these issues from a nonprofit's perspective, and that very question came up. One of the things that we spoke to had to do with, I'm going to say, intention, right? So with nonprofits, the intention is often sort of earnestly there. Getting from intention to action and getting well resourced enough to sort of turn that action into impact seemed to weigh heavier on our nonprofit friends and colleagues. But I'm curious about, if anyone else has a thought there.
Well, I think that what's interesting is that even though many of these spaces are distinct, right? I think the stakeholders are somewhat similar. But if you look at some of these, people who make up museum boards of directors are also donors, right? Are also collectors. I don't think that there's as much division between some of these main stakeholders. So when we think about futuring, this process of really identifying what needs to happen to shift the culture, it's a reminder that the stakeholders have to be a part of that process and a part of that conversation at a certain point, can't be removed from the ideation around what futuring entails, right? And so I would say that that's one point of convergence between the nonprofit and for-profit sector, a conversation around how our stakeholders included in this process of futuring. No one gets a pass. Everyone has to contribute to the building of that vision.
That's fantastic. I know we're at time, so Lise, I'd love to have you kind of wrap us up. This has been an incredible conversation, and we are so grateful for the expertise and perspective of these panelists. We love building community. Lise, I'll hand it off to you to give some closing remarks. And unmute.
It's my signature move. Thank you, Ola, for moving us through a really rich conversation. And thank you, Eunice and Jumoke and Aundrae, for sharing with us so generously, and Julia for walking us through the data. This has been fun, and I feel like it should have been 2 hours long. But what we will do is share with everybody the data. I think it's maybe a 5-page mini report that we'll email to everyone who signed up today. This conversation has been recorded, so we will have that available for sharing as well. And I think I'm forgetting something. Am I forgetting something, Julia?
Just please continue the conversation with us. We have our kind of general email here, and we welcome we welcome you to reach out, whether it's for our services as a business or our services as supporting the talent pool. We are here for you. We are excited about affecting this change in the industry.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all. Take good care.
Take care, you guys.
Bye.